welcome back. Today I'm going to cover Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Now, I've covered the Terminator series as one video, but I don't think I covered Terminator 2 that much in that one because I was covering the whole way how the series just went downhill and how they... I think because my favourite is the first one, I covered the first one more than the second one, and then I covered the disaster of the rest of the series. It's hard to remember now, in a sense, because there's been so many bad sequels, just how good the first two films were. How, for the genre, they were really something. And how they influenced so much of what came in the 90s and 2000s. Blade Runner influenced things as an arty film, but Terminator and RoboCop were the ones that influenced a lot of genre filmmaking because they showed you how it could be done in a way that was dynamic and interesting and character-based rather than design-based, and how stories with these characters could actually work. And Terminator 2 was kind of like the big blowout of this original early cyberpunk era, and it kind of died away for when it came back up the Matrix. And there's so much of the Matrix and coming from Terminator 2 and RoboCop, as well as the anime stuff, but there was an influence there. But Terminator 2, I actually managed to watch the projector again. So the first time I've actually watched it on a big screen since I first saw it in the cinema. I actually saw Terminator 2 in a preview like a week before it was actually released. So that's one of the few previews I've ever been to is Terminator 2, and it was packed. People were standing in the back. People were willing to just buy a ticket and stand at the back and say, "It's okay, I don't mind not having a seat." That's how big this film was. Because this was a film that had so much pent-up want for it. So ever since the first Terminator came out, people wanted Terminator 2. Because the film was wonderful. The first Terminator was wonderful. And it was very sequel-friendly because it was telling a story that had a obvious point where you could go further with it. It was a self-contained story at a middle, beginning, and end. It could work on its own and without any sequels. But you could do a second story quite easily with this one. And I think everyone wanted a sequel. And it took a long time for the rights to be sorted out. But by the time the rights were sorted out, it had actually come to Carolco, who were a big production company at that time, who had just come off the Rambo series. They were trying to keep... The base was action. And they were trying to have a good base of action, but they were trying to do classic action films. So they'd financed a couple of Waterhill films. They Extreme Prejudice and Red Heat. These films had not done great, but they were still Waterhill was a professional director. They had hooked up with Paul Verhoeven and done Total Recall, which is a wonderful sci-fi mind trip. It's still really enjoyable because it takes the mind trip elements of sci-fi and mixes them with a sci-fi action plot. And it made it understandable for the mass audience. So it's other films can take those ideas and make them more obscure and weird, but no film really covered in a way that everybody could understand and go, okay, I get that. Which again led to the Matrix in the sense of that understanding you have different layers within a plot and they could all work as one thing, even though it could be a dream, it could be reality. That was something that suddenly became allowable in the mainstream after Total Recall. Really. As a sci-fi conceit, you can do that in a sci-fi movie with Vanilla Sky and things like that. It suddenly was okay, this is now allowable. People have worked out dream logic in movies to a degree through sci-fi. So there was that element. So that influence. And when Total Recall was coming out in home video, we were getting these trailers for Terminator 2, because that was the next big Arnie film. He did Kindergarten Cop in between to relax a little bit and not have to get blown up so much. But this was the next big film. This is Arnie's big film of his career. And it was it wasn't, ultimately it wouldn't be James Cameron's big film of his career. He was going to go on and do Titanic and Avatar. But this was probably the last one he made that was universally loved. Because Titanic is enjoyed by most people, right? But it does have a backlash because people don't like the romance, and some people don't like the romance, and some of the dialogue's not that great. There are elements in here that would go to Titanic, and it would show the flaws of James Cameron as a writer. Avatar was famously massive hit and divisive, because some people saw it and said, I don't get why people love this. I really like Avatar, but I know people don't like Avatar. I know people who don't like Avatar. And it's like, it's fine. To me, it's sort of like King Kong, that kind of weird other thing that's, either you get it or you don't, so it's not a big deal to me if you don't like it. I do. I even like Titanic, even though there's massive flaws in it. I much prefer A Night to Remember. But Terminator 2 was kind of the end of the first part of James Cameron's career, in a sense that he made True Lies after it, and True Lies was almost like an epilogue. Like it was going towards where Cameron was going to go, but it was also hard back to his R-rated action roots. But Terminator 2 was kind of like the end of the first great run, which was Terminator, Aliens, The Abyss, and Terminator 2. That was his first big run of films that everyone really enjoyed. The Abyss had its problems, but it's still got some wonderful stuff in it. I mean, the aliens are the flaw, but there's still some wonderful stuff in The Abyss. And Terminator 2, I didn't like as much as Terminator because I like Terminator's just cyclical nature and the kind of sense of the love story in that. Because I think it was Cameron's best love story. And Aliens had a maternal love story between mother and daughter, and that was the emotional thing. In this one, Terminator 2, it's a family alternative family where it's Terminator, Sarah Connor, and John Connor. They're the little nuclear family in the centre of it. But rewatching it, because I haven't watched it for a while, but rewatching it, it's like one of the things that jumps out at me compared to Aliens is, in Aliens it's Ripley's story where Newt's the character that's facilitating that story. In Terminator 2, it's John Connor's story. Everyone thinks that Sarah Connor's the main character in this film. It's actually John Connor. I mean, when I was rewatching it, it was like, no, this is a John Connor story that's got Sarah Connor in it. And it's amazing that big film allows like a young actor, Edward Furlong, to actually be carrying a lot of the movie, because he carries a lot of it, and he has some criticism for his performance, but he was like 11, 12 when he made the film, and the worst stuff in it from his performance wise is things I'm sure there's lots of takes of, and Cameron chose a more bigger take. There's a scene early on, it's probably the worst scene in the film. I think they shot this early, where it's at the camp and it's basically about they find the note, no fate, and he has to say she's going to blow him away and have to go and stop them. And Cameron's so focused on his camera move that he should have been focused on the performance. I think that's the weakest point of that performance, because it's a bit high. I'm sure they did it quite a few times, and they chose that one probably for technical reasons. But it's like you should have cut in and got a quiet performance there. But generally, it's a very good performance, actually. There's a lot there. I think the problem some people have is some of them don't like the character, because the character is, a notable kid who's very disturbed by lots of things that happen in his life. He acts out a lot. He's terrible to his foster parents. He steals money. He steals credit cards and rips people off. He's a child that's going out of control. So of course he's not going to be likable to start with. By modern standards, or by like even traditional standards of that time, it's like this is a troubled child. This is a person you want to keep away from. But when you see him in the narrative, and as the narrative progresses, you see there actually is a moral core to this character that actually influences the plot constantly, and is actually the person who kind of focuses the plot continuously, and is the kind of person making decisions that actually are lead the film to its conclusion. Sarah Connor, actually, when you watch it, is a person who's very disturbed early on. She's very motivated to save her child, but she's also very motivated in a lot of dark directions, and she has to almost be redeemed by the love of her child. But it needs his proactive work. He has to also proactive get the Terminator to stop killing people and be a force for good. I mean, it's basically is the story. It's called Judgment Day, and it's basically how the John Connor character becomes a John Connor character. So how he learns how to be what he was meant to be. The other characters are there for him, but it's really his character. It's the same way in Titanic. James Cameron's character, there's a lot of characters around him, but it's really the Kate Winslet character who's the main character. Every other character around is helpful. Some of the characters are more fun, but they're not the emotional core of the story. They're not the reason why you're interested in the story, if you're interested in the story. So, that was a big thing of rewatching, is just how much the John Connor character actually is really important in the film. And that's what I think the big thing they've lost since this film. And there's a big mistake they made in Terminator Dark Fate when they killed John Connor character off. Because ultimately you were left with a Sarah Connor character whose thing was done by the end of Terminator 2. Whose arc was kind of done. And they didn't have any real ideas how to push her forward. So the character became one note in that sequel, and it was not really a good comeback character. It was ultimately a character like, I've seen this before and this is not interesting. No matter what Unhammer was doing, it wasn't that interesting. It was because the story had moved on from that character. And the sequels, after this, they didn't really focus on John Connor character in the way that this film did, in the sense of his development. It was just like, he's there, he has to be protected. And it was like, Terminator 3 should have been his character working up the mantle to be who he was going to be, rather than being a kid who was scared most of the time and who didn't understand what he had to do, when this version of the character understood what to do. So it was like, the character that had in Terminator 3 with a different actor was ultimately undoing what was done in this film, which is very strange. And they kept on doing that in the sequels until the character became a villain in Genesis, and it was like, well, you've just destroyed the whole mythology of this story. So that was, I guess, why people even can't articulate that. I think other people lost interest in Terminator was the sense of, like, the character you were promised here delivered, and then they never really pushed forward for that. It's almost become he became the liability of the series rather than the strength of the series. Because he was basically the character you had in the first one with Sarah Connor. She's that character in the first one, and this one is him. And it was him learning to actually be the person to take charge. But everyone, because they had their affiliations with the first one, is also the Sarah Connor story. It's like, no, it's really not anymore. She's got a different part in this one. But it's not the central emotional core of it. She's part of that. She's tied to it, but it's not really about her journey compared to what's the journey of her son, really. So that's just the big screen experience. That was a big thing. Because actually, if you watch it, it's about them trying to find him. It's about him escaping with the help of the Terminator from the T-1000. It's him getting his mother out of a bad situation. It's him then going with his mother to Mexico to escape from the whole thing. He's the one who starts to make the Terminator understand that you're not meant to kill people. He's the one who has to learn, in the dealings with the two guys who are trying to help him, that this Terminator is dangerous and you have to give it orders. He's the one responsible for that. He's one of the programs that he has to take responsibility for it. And he slowly learns through the film of what his moral code actually is. He's the one who actually decides when his mother goes mad and she says to go and kill the person who created Skynet. He's the one who goes back and says, no, we have to go back into the line of fire to stop her, to save her soul from damnation, basically, to just stop her destroying herself. And he's the one who pretty much comforts her, gets the kid out of the other kid who doesn't understand this stuff out of the room, gets Schwarzenegger to show Joe Morton character like he's a robot from the future, And then he's the one who basically sets up the final act. Throughout this time, he's been protected by these other characters, but it's always his choices who are actually guide the narrative. The Sarah Connor character makes the destructive choices throughout the film. Like, she's the one who's really damaged and who wants to protect her child, but is going about it all the wrong way. At the start, she's in a mental asylum because she tries to blow something up, and she's mad and crazy. That's not what she should have been doing. So that's a problem. She's also the one who brings him back into the line of fire, you know, by trying to kill the person who's Skynet, and it's really the John Connor character who calms her down. And then that's when they decide to be proactive and try and take out Skynet from the source in a different way from what she was really emotionally going for. So he's the one who actually is the key character throughout this film, like how the things are going to go down. He's the one, he learns to be John Connor by the end of it, even though he's only like 12 or something. He's like the central character in this film. And basically, if you look at it, the thing everyone remembers, everyone talks about is how much emotion they had, you know, at the end when Schwarzenegger sacrificed himself. Well, that wouldn't have worked unless the kid and Schwarzenegger characters worked. If the kid hadn't changed the Terminator into this other thing by the end of it. If the emotion between the kid and his mother hadn't worked out so she could see beyond what Terminator was in the past to what he was now. It's all reliant on the kid being the moral force of the story to actually get you from point A to point B to C. He's the central character of this film. Everyone always thinks it's Sarah Connor, and it's like, no, she's the person who makes the mistakes and then has to pull herself back up and realise, I've made a horrible mistake. What do we do now? And it's usually her son who does it. And if you look at the extended version, he's the one who turns the Terminator from just fallen orders to try and actually learn from around about him. So he's the one who actually makes the Terminator start to learn how to be human, or how to be approximately human, understand human emotions and why sacrifices are needed and why people are trying to be better than they are a lot of the time. It's that kind of thing that he's the one who actually forces it. He's the guy who you see throughout, he's the one who calms everyone down and actually focuses them the way a leader would. So he's not a leader in the sense of, I'm going to be the machoest guy in the world. It's much more like, I'm the one who's going to point in the right direction all the time to make sure you go where you need to go. Which is why it's Judgment Day. Called Judgment Day is because it's like his judgments that actually create the path that makes him go on to destroy Skynet. So that's really what I got from watching. Outside of all how much enjoyable the film is, it's a really enjoyable blockbuster movie. Because you do have characters you like. And the characters who are, even the Sarah Connor character, who makes all these bad decisions, because she's played well by Linda Hamilton, it's understandable. Schwarzenegger's the best he's ever been because he's a character to play off that allows him to be Schwarzenegger but also have emotions and have it gradually occur. And also be the butt of the joke a lot of the time. But he's a straight man. It's like he was doing whatever he was doing, but if the kid didn't work, it wouldn't matter. It really wouldn't matter. The kid had to really work or the film would fail because he's the central character. Schwarzenegger's the fun character. That's the difference. The John Connor character is the character who has to work. And it's a harder job in a way because you have to actually make it work. Even if you might not like the character that much, you have to do things to make it work. Even though the character sometimes makes mistakes. It's still a tricky thing. And just remember the kid was 12 or something, 12, 13 when he was played this part. And it was the biggest budget film of all time at that point. That must have been pretty scary. so I mean, that's why I always think that some of the more recent, like, nasty comments about Furlong's performance in this film miss the point of the film itself and also how the film was actually made. The film was the biggest budget film of all time. It was written a certain way to have a certain character. They cast someone who was not experienced because he had a real life element to him that wasn't like what the other TV kids were like. Because if you remember that time, most child actors in that time were horrible. They were all in advertising, they were all doing selling stuff all the time. They were like mechanical kids almost. And this kid was actually much more realistic and annoying in the right way. So that's one of the things that always bugged me, how he get criticised for that. And it's also, he had some of the worst dialogue. Because I mean, James Cameron is better construction as a dialogue. And there is some lines where he has to say something like, made me feel the whole world is made of bullshit. It's like, how do you say that line? Because it's a terrible line. And there's little bits like that come on every so often in the film. And also, James Cameron likes some actors to overact sometimes. When it's Bill Paxton, it's fine. But there's stuff in this one where Linda Hamilton's also going over the top. Where she's talking about, she goes into this big rant to Joe Morton about being creative and can't create life and stuff. Which is not a very good scene. And they chose a pretty big performance by Linda Hamilton. Because she's a more experienced actor, it doesn't look as bad. But it's a scene with some dodgy dialogue. That's the big thing that fans don't admit. There's some very bad dialogue in some of this film. It still works, despite that. But it's something James Cameron's flaw is. One of his big flaws is he seems to pick certain takes sometimes that the dialogue, the acting is, he chose the biggest version of a scene for energy, but it's also the fakest reading of the scene. Like, it's too big. And that leaves actors out to dry sometimes. And they get criticised, and it's like, well, the director chose that take. They probably did a lot of takes that were quiet, you know, or big, and it was like, he chose those takes. So there's certain films that you think, well, everybody in this film has one or two of those moments where they're not that good because the bad take was chosen. It's a flawed film because most films are flawed in some way. The fact that flaws don't matter because the story works so well, the action works so well, you're in the action scenes. The big thing with this film is you're actually in the action scenes and you actually feel, because having a kid chased by a T-1000 on a bike that barely works and he's in a truck, that's a great action scene, especially when it goes into the tunnels of the river, the dried up river. You know, the escape from the mental hospital works so well because so much of it's a build up, slow build up. And the only person who can help is Schwarzenegger, and he's miles away and he's slowly coming to the thing, and that really works because you know that your lead character, he was in trouble. And the finale is pretty much like the last 40 minutes of just one action scene after another, and they all work because all the emotion's been there. And that's the big thing about action. You need to actually like the characters for the emotion to be there, and then have a set up, and then go against the setup to make it interesting. Which is something James Cameron's very good at, understanding that that's the setup. Well, how do we twist it to make it interesting? Which he always does in his action scenes in the 80s and 90s. He's always very clever about playing around with your expectations and then going in another direction. Which is underrated. It's something John McTiernan is also good at. Most of the good action directors, and Paul Verhoeven as well, they're very good at understanding you have to set stuff up. But sometimes you go the way they expect, and sometimes you don't go the way they expect. And that you need that kind of balance. So Terminator 2 is just great fun. It's so much fun. So I can't recommend it enough. But you've all probably seen it. Everyone's seen it. It's stupid saying I recommend it, but it's... I recommend rewatching the biggest screen possible. If you have a projector, watch it. The thing is, the 4K is not a good 4K transfer, but if you project it, it looks pretty good because it's big screen and it doesn't look waxy at all. It just looks normal. But on the TV, it looks a bit weird. So that's kind of one thing I would suggest if you've got the 4K. If you have a projector, projecting it, the flaws in the transfer are minimal. So, hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back soon with another one. Right, bye for now.